Welcome to Finding Avalon, the podcast that amplifies disabled voices. I'm your host, Jenna, a disability inclusion advocate, communicator, and storyteller. This is a place where disabled folks correct the narrative by sharing authentic lived experiences. Join me as we explore life with disability through our lens, because representation matters. Welcome to another episode of Finding Avalon. This indie podcast is a place where I unapologetically center the work and wisdom of disabled, chronically ill, and neurodiverse people, one story at a time. This time around, we're featuring Láyla Messner. Láyla is an autistic art activist who grew up in the Canadian wilderness. Through painting, speaking, and social media, she raises awareness about high-masking autism and invisible disability. With a master's in trauma healing and doctoral level studies in psychology, she shares from first-hand experience living with multiple invisible disabilities. She challenges the idea that human worth is tied to productivity, employment, or independence. In her work, Láyla centers disabled joy, autonomy, and the understanding that disabled lives are worth living for ourselves. Welcome, Láyla.
Thank you so much, Jenna. I'm so honored to be here. I am so excited about your podcast. It's so important.
Láyla, can you share a little bit about your disability journey?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, Jenna, I am an autistic art activist who grew up in the wilderness. I have multiple invisible disabilities, including high masking autism, complex post traumatic stress disorder, severe migraine disorder, chronic pain, and most likely ADHD. I had chronic migraine for over 5 years with a daily pain level of 7 or higher, though I am happy to report that in the last couple of years, thanks to brand new medications, I have been able to decrease to episodic. So, since most of my health conditions are lifelong, autism is a lifelong developmental disability, migraine is also a lifelong neurological spectrum disease, I have been disabled all my life. And most of my disability journey has been about coming to terms with my disabilities, learning to work in harmony with my brain instead of pushing myself past my limits all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of my journey, I've earned a master's degree in trauma healing from Goddard College. I studied psychology at the doctoral level, and now I am an art activist and speaker on a mission to raise awareness about high masking autism and invisible disability.
You bring so much experience, lived experience, and professional experience to this podcast. I'm so grateful to be able to talk with you today and learn all about what you're doing and what you're experiencing.
Thank you so much.
A lot of people don't realize that when you have one disability, it can also have a knock on effect and develop other disabilities. Even your treatments or medications for certain disabilities can then create spin off conditions and autoimmune illnesses. It's quite a spiral, I think, sometimes.
That is so true. Yeah, it's all interrelated and they all affect each other.
Mhm. I wanted to talk with you about masking. We know that masking takes a serious toll on autistic women that many people may not realize or even consider, especially for those of us who are expert high maskers and mimickers. We seem to be together on the outside, on the surface level, but we're struggling and need much more support than anyone could possibly realize behind the scenes. How would you describe your own masking, the effort that it takes, and the impact that it has on you?
Yeah, I love how you put that. So I am late diagnosed autistic. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 40 years old. And a lot of that is because I am high masking. There are so many misconceptions about high masking autism. People think that we are quote unquote high functioning. They think that we are less autistic, that we're not struggling, that we have low support needs or even no support needs at all. The truth is that for myself and many other autistic people, masking is a trauma response, or at the very least, a survival response. So, as you know, my background is in trauma psychology. So, what I believe this means is that our brains and bodies learned as children that displaying autistic traits leads to risk. It leads to
Mhm.
risk of trauma, abuse, abandonment, and isolation, which are things that the nervous system takes incredibly seriously in terms of survival. And so our body and brain adapted by learning to mask our autistic traits. And obviously, to be able to mask, an autistic person needs to have certain natural traits and abilities. For whatever reason, being high masking seems to be more common in autistic women. And for me, one thing that I've noticed is that because my body and brain prioritize masking my autistic traits to such a high degree, if I have any mental or physical energy at all, that is actually the first thing that my brain will do is mask my autistic traits. And so what this looks like is that the worse I'm doing, the better I seem to be doing. Because as soon as I start struggling, my mask clicks on. And my mask is kind of this standard neuronormative, feminine, bubbly, happy thing. And so my best friend actually knows that if I seem to be really happy, she should probably ask if I'm okay,
Mhm.
because it's impossible to tell when my mask is engaged that I'm struggling or suffering. Because I'm a trauma survivor, I'm able to contain such high levels of distress within my body without displaying them on the outside that it's just impossible to tell. But that doesn't mean that I'm capable of functioning at those high levels of distress. It just means that I appear okay. And again, because that's a survival response.
That is such a relatable experience. We're taught to behave, be good, blend in, please everyone, not show your difference. And especially if you experience punishment or harsh criticism about your different sensory system and your different neurotype without even knowing back then what that was. It's almost like it becomes this automatic defense mechanism to perform. And when you said that at the times when you're performing, you're most neurotypical or neuronormative is the times when you might be struggling the most. And I have had friends point that out to me too. They would see me maybe hosting an event and being on, quote unquote, on, performing, speaking, bubbly, social, and inside you just feel like you're dying inside, or at the very end of the event, okay, whew, it's done. I'm glad I experienced it. That was very hard on me because I feel like I've filtered myself into oblivion. And then I'm out for 3 days mentally, emotionally, and energy wise. The energy just takes a nosedive. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, what you just shared is such a classic example for high masking autistic adults. It's really important to remember that the fact that we're high masking doesn't mean that our autistic traits are inherently less pronounced. And it actually doesn't even necessarily mean that we have low support needs. It means that we hide our traits and our support needs as a survival response. And a lot of the time, this isn't even in our conscious control because it is a survival response. It's something that our nervous systems and our bodies just do on purpose when we feel at risk, which in a neuronormative society is a lot of the time.
Hmm.
There are a few things that I've learned to do in terms of masking on purpose. It took me until I was about 30 years old to learn how to perform neuronormative femininity in a way that resulted in more positive results. Things like smiling and agreeing and not being assertive and not, demonstrating blunt communication or things like that. But I can only maintain that for short periods of time. And most of my masking is automatic and not within my conscious control. And I normally can only unmask either alone in my own personal private space or with one or two really close autistic loved ones.
Hmm. I think that's super important for listeners because if you don't live with autism, and in particularly as a woman who may be late discovered and is high masking, people don't really see the nitty-gritty of what unmasking is like unless they are very close. Like if they're the person who's waking up next to you in the morning or your closest friend who knows every single thing about you. I know myself, I even struggle when I'm alone. I catch myself saying, am I still masking? Like, there's so many layers, and it feels almost like it's like concreted on. And it can even be exhausting when you're by yourself because you have equipped yourself automatically to survive and keep safe in all of these social and systemic kind of situations. It's not like taking off a jacket and putting it in the closet. It is still feels very embedded.
Yeah, I really can't emphasize this enough how survival mechanisms are run by the nervous system. They're not something that we do on purpose. And it really is this fundamental experience that our bodies have had of unsafety and what we need to do to be safe. So, of course, like unmasking feels like this tremendous risk for the body. The body, a lot of the time, can't even allow it to happen.
Hmm.
I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that, of course, autistic people who are high masking do have greater access and privilege in a society that is designed for neurotypical people than autistic adults who are unable to mask. But at the same time, we also face other types of discrimination. So we have lack of access to needed disability supports because our disability isn't recognized, because of this false assumption that we don't have these autistic traits or we don't have these autistic struggles, when in fact we actually do. And we also face things like fake claiming, which is a type of bullying that gets directed at people with all sorts of disabilities, where people tell us, you're faking it, you're not really disabled. And for autistic women, high masking autistic women especially, there's a lot of fake claiming because of the image in popular culture of what autism looks like. And so some things that I've noticed really trigger fake claiming are femininity, attractiveness, physical fitness, and joy, which we'll get into a little bit later. If I post a video of me dancing for 5 seconds in a pink dress, people will go insane in the comments telling me you can't be autistic, you can't be disabled. Why? Like, there's nothing about being feminine or wearing a pink dress or dancing that means you can't be autistic. Dancing is actually one of my primary ways of stimming and expressing autistic joy. My dancing is fundamentally autistic. Yet when people see me do it, they say that I can't be autistic. There's just so much stigma and so many false assumptions about autism,
Hmm.
and they really affect high masking autistic women.
Yeah. And then there's also that experience of pretty privilege, right? A lot of people don't know about it or think about it, but if you're conventionally attractive, if you're able to code switch and mimic and mask, then there's some privilege to not being as targeted or bullied. Usually, not always, but it can happen that you just blend in a bit better. So then they just think, no, there's no way this person could be neurodivergent or autistic. I've seen your content online. I follow along, and I do notice that trend when you are presenting as a joyful feminine person wearing a dress. It's so different from some of your other types of content too. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is that pretty privilege, but then at the same time, there's the increase of that other type of discrimination, of the fake claiming and the lack of access to
Oh
supports
yes.
that come along with that. Because of the stigma and the stigmatizing image around disability, people who aren't disabled cannot hold the image in their minds a lot of the time that a disabled person can be attractive, which is like conventionally attractive. I believe
Hmm.
all people are attractive, but
Yes.
conventionally attractive. Like that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous assumption.
Completely agree with you. And also to say that being attractive means that there's no possible way that you are struggling or that you could be disabled in some way because, well, you perform just well. You perform like us. So there's really nothing quote unquote wrong with you. I've received that. I've had people argue me black and blue that I don't have any of my non-visible disabilities no matter what. They just do not see it, and they'll even say it, well, I don't see disability. That would be like telling a black person that I don't see color, right? I don't see your challenges, I don't see the real barriers and your real struggles.
Yeah,
They think that that's a compliment, and it's actually showing how many barriers there really are when people don't unlearn that ableism.
100%. Yeah.
Another thing that comes to mind about masking, and I have a feeling you are well acquainted with this, is the level of burnout that can be experienced because if you are constantly masking and constantly code switching and constantly putting that much of your emotional and physical energy and your mental energy, it it has to come to a point where you just can't do it anymore. Can you talk a little bit more about burnout?
Oh, yeah, I would love to go into this because it's such a big a risk factor and such a serious thing for autistic adults in general, and especially high masking autistic adults. Something that's really connected to that is cognitive cost, which is really not understood. So, a lot of people think that in autism, really the primary two sources of disability are if an individual is non speaking or if an individual has intellectual disability. And don't get me wrong, I do not want to downplay the significance of either of those. They're very significant disabling things. But those are not the only factors in autistic disability. So, autism is a cognitive disability. And cognitive cost explains the fact that certain tasks take different amounts of brain energy, if you will, for
Mhm.
different people. So, for autistic people, um, things like social interactions, executive functioning, verbal communication, sensory stimulation have much higher cognitive cost than they do for people who are not autistic. And masking has tremendous cognitive cost because we're having to mimic and repress our traits. And for me, when I'm masking, it feels like I'm bleeding energy. Like if I am
Mm.
having a conversation with a neurotypical person where my body has decided I need to mask, I feel like I'm having a conversation with a vampire. All of my energy is being drained out and I can feel it leaving my body and leaving my brain, and I can feel that cost
Mhm.
adding up. And over time, this cognitive cost issue for high masking autistic women leads to burnout. And like I said, autistic burnout is very serious and it's distinct from work related burnout. And it can lead to things like de skilling, where we lose the ability to do things that we could do before. And it's incredibly terrifying. I did a poll on my Instagram, which is mostly made up of high masking autistic women. I asked, what is your biggest challenge as an autistic person? And the resounding response was burnout.
Okay. Yeah, because you are drained beyond the point of return. And I only recently learned about skills regression or skills loss. I noticed that had never experienced it before, or maybe very occasionally. I started to have trouble speaking. My verbal skills went out the door, and simple tasks that I could easily do, I felt almost like as if I couldn't read anymore, or I couldn't calculate anymore the items that I needed to do for a basic task. And I started to realize that I was losing memory skill and certain things because my system was so overloaded that I had no capacity left for those simple tasks.
Yeah, 100%, like executive functioning skills as well. When you lose those, that can be quite terrifying. The first time that I had like a acute episode of burnout, um, I was in tears at the idea of taking a shower, just the idea of the
Yeah.
water touching my skin.
Yes.
And
Um,
like speaking, totally hear you on that. I had to have a friend come with me to the doctor and speak to the doctor on my behalf because I was unable to speak to navigate a situation. Yeah, it's just very serious.
is that part of shutdown? Because I've been learning. I'm learning a lot of new things, but shutdown is something that I've started to learn a bit more. And I wondered, is that part of a verbal shutdown? Is that
Yeah, I
maybe
think
what that is?
definitely can be part of a verbal shutdown. There's also situational mutism, which I
Mm.
will experience in certain high stress situations, regardless of burnout, where I cannot verbalize in the way that I would normally be able to.
It's so important to be able to talk about these things and describe them because I am sure there are many, many people who are experiencing it and feeling scared or overwhelmed, not understanding what's happening. It's the joke about, "Oh, my circuits are fried," these kind of old 80s jokes about our brain is just fried. I feel like that applies. I feel like you've overloaded all of the circuits and they just cannot right now. And I'm hoping that some of the things that I've lost will come back, and I'm sure that they will with rest, and I'm still learning about it, but it is quite a shock sometimes to realize that there has been a loss of skill or ability because I didn't know that that was part of my high masking autism.
Yeah, it's so important to have the language and also just to be able to try to explain it to people who don't share the disability and how it's different, for example, from a neurotypical person saying, "Oh, my circuits are fried," right?
Hmm.
Autistic burnout isn't the same as work-related burnout. It's not the same as a neurotypical person feeling frazzled at the end of a busy week, right? It's a distinct thing and it's very serious.
I wanted to ask you about your experience as an autistic woman living with multiple non visible disabilities. What's an issue that you see that's at the intersection of feminism and disability rights?
So to me, feminism is intersectional and it's fundamentally about systems of power and privilege, not just only about women's rights. For me right now, the question that is at top of mind is who is allowed to feel and express joy? And this question connects to both women's rights and the rights of disabled people. So women, as you know, are objectified in patriarchies. We're treated as objects who exist for the joy of others and are in service to others. And our joy has actually been co opted in the sense that a lot of the time we're expected to feel joy and express joy for the benefit of other people, especially men, right? For male ego, for male self esteem. It's not connected anymore to our own authentic joy. And for disabled people, there is a double bind around joy. On the one hand, there's a lot of pressure for us to be happy. Um, People will tell you, make a gratitude list, go for a walk, stop talking about that. You're dragging me down. You're always so
Hmm.
negative, right? We're expected to be happy for the benefit of non disabled people. We're also presented in the media as quote unquote inspiration porn. Here's this disabled person who overcomes impossible odds to
Yeah,
solve this problem that would have been difficult for anyone, disabled or not, to solve.
yeah.
um, our stories aren't for ourselves, right? And then um, if you're dealing with a chronic illness, you may have noticed, as I know I did when I had chronic migraine, that at a certain point I realized if I didn't stop talking about my suffering, I wasn't going to have any friends. Because
Yeah,
even the people who love me were sick of hearing about the fact that I was in pain and suffering and discomfort
yeah,
and, the struggles and the horror every day.
yeah. And it's such a lonely place to be because we rely on our support systems and our friends so much. We want them to see us and understand us, but we also don't want to be overloading them with the concerns for all different reasons. It's very hard. It can put you in a lonely place super fast.
Yeah. And so I learned that if I needed to focus on the positive and kind of change the narrative to only tell, more positive, inspiring stories. But then I noticed the second half of the double bind, which was as soon as I started expressing joy, as soon as I started having a good day or only sharing the good parts of my day, or pushing myself past my limits to get more things done and then harming myself, I started getting more pushback that said, you're not disabled, you're not sick, you're faking it, you look fine, you were fine the other day, you were able to do X, Y, and Z the other day, why can't you do it this day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been there too. Well, everything looks great on social media. You seem to be fine. You don't look like you're in any pain, or, oh, you must be better now, or maybe you're just stressed and you're not neurodivergent. All of these invalidating assumptions that here we are, masking within an inch of our lives, performing for other people's comfort, performing to protect ourselves so that we can have some kind of meaningful life and participate in life. And it's almost like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Talk about it, you're negative. Show your joy, you're not really needing support. It's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. And underlying this is like an ableist belief that disability and joy can't coexist. And this is because, from the perspective of many non disabled people, they believe if I was disabled, I wouldn't want to be alive. And so, therefore, the lives of disabled people have no value and have no meaning. And this is absurd and also
Mhm.
not true, right? And so, again, like with the objectification of women, our joy isn't for us, our joy is for non disabled people. And so, what I'm really passionate about is that disabled women, disabled people have the right to feel joy. Now, don't
Hmm.
take this to mean that disabled people should feel joy. um, but we have the right to feel joy the way that we authentically feel it. And we have the right to thrive. And we have the right to the supports that we require in order to be able to thrive. And our joy is for us. Our joy doesn't exist to make non disabled people feel better about their fear of becoming disabled.
Hmm. And also, not only experience the joy, but express it because women are policed, tone policed, body language policed, policed within any possible parameter, let's say. When I speak in a way that sounds like, oh, well, that's too masculine, that's too aggressive, even though it's not aggressive, it's assertive, confident. There's not any emotion attached either to like, well, I'm right. It's more like I'm going to share the information that I have, and here are the thoughts that I have, or here are the emotions that I have if I'm expressing joy or dissatisfaction. And women are so heavily monitored in society and policed to express in a way that pleases and serves patriarchy, right? And also centers the non-disabled comfort and the non-disabled psyche almost. It's definitely a topic I think we could talk about for days. Is there anything else you wanted to add about this?
I guess I just want to affirm what you were saying. There are so many boxes around women and how we're allowed to show up and how we're allowed to express and what we're allowed to feel. And there are boxes around disabled people. We have to be happy enough to not make non disabled people uncomfortable, but not so happy that non disabled people don't think we're disabled. It's like living in a cage. And I am absolutely passionate about, for myself and for all disabled women and disabled individuals, freeing ourselves from that cage. Like, we have the right to authentic expression of both our suffering and struggle and our joy.
We know that a neurotypical society just loves their toxic positivity. They love their inspiration porn, like you mentioned. I sometimes give presentations or talks, and I say each time, I'm not an inspiration. I'm not an overcoming story, overcoming against all the odds. These these lofty stories that are held up by non-disabled people to make them feel better or to motivate them in their own lives. Like, well, if that person could do it, well, I have no excuse. And after the talks, people will walk up to me and say, "You're so inspirational." And I say, "Oh, did you not hear?" And so what I'll say then in response usually is, if I am inspirational, let's say that I am, and I am inspirational to you, please let it be for my vision, my work, my skills, my heart, not because I happen to do these things while also being multiply disabled. We're just living our lives, right? So, Layla, how does your advocacy work take form?
So, as an art activist, I'm working in three modalities to spread awareness about high masking autism and invisible disability. So, I'm a content creator. I have a very active Instagram and Facebook following. And I'm also a public speaker. I speak about the brain as part of the environment. Um, this is what invisible disability looks like, and what is high masking autism. And I'm a visual artist. So, specifically, I'm an abstract expressionist painter working in acrylics. And right now, I'm really focused on painting disabled joy and autistic joy. So, like large, colorful paintings that just come out of that place of natural joy for me. And I'm a strong believer in uninhibited self expression for autistic and disabled people, but for all humans.
Mhm. I've seen some of your artwork, and it looks like, is it intuitive, organic kind of, painting? Like, I maybe don't have the right words for it, but it looks to me like it's very freeing and definitely very colorful.
Yeah, so I call it instinctual painting. Like I said, I was raised in the wilderness, so I'm very connected to nature and to my own nature. And when I paint, it's all about being as free as a wild animal, like just being totally free to be myself as an autistic and disabled person and just expressing on the canvas through color and gesture and texture.
I love that. It's a beautiful way to express yourself through art, which in turn brings joy.
Yes, absolutely.
What is a common misconception about disability in your experience, and how can we work to change that narrative?
Oof, there's so many. But obviously, the one that is nearest and dearest to my heart is invisible disability. So, the misconception is that disability is visible, and that the more obvious a disability is from the outside, the more disabled the person. And conversely, non apparent disabilities are less disabling, which isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
Underlying that assumption is the assumption that it's up to non-disabled people to judge disability looking from the outside. And connected to that is the stigma and the ableist belief that people are faking disability to get access to supports that they don't need or deserve. And the reality is, disabled people fake being well. We fake doing better than we're doing because there is so much stigma around disability and around needing support. And so, one thing that I'm extremely passionate about is challenging stigma and invisibility through vulnerable storytelling. And today, what I'd like to do is challenge the stigma around dependence by sharing my own story and opening up about my financial dependence on my father. So I have been financially dependent on my father my entire adult life as an autistic disabled adult. And what this looks like is receiving financial support to cover my basic living expenses. Without this support, which I'm truly grateful to my father for providing, I would be dead because with the disabilities that I have, I am unable to financially support myself. And at any given moment, I am one support payment away from homelessness and hunger. If this support ever stopped, I would not be able to meet my basic needs. And I'm sharing this because I talk to people. And so I know that people think that I look fine and that I don't look disabled because I am high masking and my disabilities are invisible. And so I want to bring visibility to this issue, to the fact that even though from the outside I might look like I'm not disabled, I would not be alive without financial support. I am financially dependent as a disabled person. And I want other people who are struggling with invisible disabilities to know like your disability is equal and valid to visible disabilities. So I am able to live independently as an autistic disabled adult. And I think we need to be clear about what that means because there's some misunderstanding. So living independently means that I am able to do basic tasks of daily living. I am able to bathe myself. I am able to prepare food. I am able to order groceries. I'm able to pay a bill using online bill payment. It is not the same thing as being able to earn the income to do those things. That's a separate issue. So I'm able to live independently, but I'm not able to support myself financially. And the reason for that is that those basic tasks are a full-time job for me. They take all my available energy. And that is even with everything we shared at the beginning of this interview. I have a master's degree. I've studied psychology at the doctoral level. I am still disabled to the point that these basic tasks take all of my energy. And this matters because it is so hard for people with invisible disabilities to access supports. The stigma around invisible disability is embedded into the systems that allow us to have support as disabled people. And people with invisible disabilities, like high masking autism, like migraine disorder, um, and various other things like chronic pain. And there's a long list. I could go on and on. We are dying, starving, and homeless because of the stigma around invisible disability. And like I said, if that support from my father, which I'm deeply grateful for, were to ever stop, I would be in that position. I would not be able to be on this podcast speaking about disability. I would not be able to do the advocacy work that I do. I would not be able to do art, and I would not even to be able to do those basic tasks of caring for myself because I need that basic level of stability. So just deeply affirming people with non-visible disabilities who are struggling to survive. It is not your fault. Your disability is valid. and your need for support is valid. And the systems absolutely have to change. The way that we think about disability fundamentally has to change. We've got to stop looking from the outside and start looking from the inside. We've got to start centering disabled voices, which is why I'm so grateful for this podcast. And we've got to focus on lived experience because disability is experienced from the inside.
I feel that deeply, and I completely agree. We use whatever platform we have to speak loudly and consistently about these truths. I know myself in this housing crisis, in a healthcare crisis, every month it is dicey. The rent is so high, then I think, well, I have to cover my rent and then my medication, but then there is nothing else. And a lot of people don't realize, I think they think that disabled folks are receiving all kinds of money from the government and all kinds of support. That is not the case. The fighting tooth and nail to get some modicum of support definitely does not cover the basics. If they're lucky enough to have gone through the hoops to actually get some kind of support. And when you have non-apparent disabilities, they don't believe you need it at all, because if you can mask like we can, speak for ourselves using the vocabulary that we use, appearing as we appear. I'm sure you've had enough people in different systems say, you don't need that. It is hard to thrive in your life when you are so busy trying to survive. And those tasks that you listed off, keeping your home clean, preparing some food for yourself, doing these basic tasks, those are things that I struggle with. And people often say, but you've won all these awards and you've traveled all over the world and you do this and you do that. But they don't see the very intense, very real struggle over what they would call simple things. They're not simple for us.
Yeah, that is the fundamental truth, I would say, of invisible disability. They don't see the struggle, but the struggle is very real and it can be extremely difficult and, in a lot of cases, impossible to access government supports as a person with a non apparent disability. And like you're saying, even when disabled people are able to access supports, those supports, even in a country like Canada, which is supposed to have very good supports and healthcare, do not cover basic living expenses. And so, in a time like now, when people in general are struggling with things like housing and food costs, people in the middle class with full time jobs who are non disabled, it's so important to recognize that disabled people are falling through the cracks, and that includes those of us with non apparent disabilities. We are deeply at risk right now and deeply in need of supports.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. It's important to hear you speak about this. There's so much taboo around talking about disability or pain. There's also an equal amount of taboo around talking about finances and talking about struggling, even though we know the state of the world right now, no matter what country you live in, but here in Canada, people with two incomes in their houses are barely keeping afloat. What about single income disabled people with no support or minimal levels of support for the basics? As you said, you can be 1 month away from being on the street with no help. And sometimes I think people don't realize that and they kind of go, no, it can't be that bad. It is a reality. It's very real.
Yes.
And it's something that needs to be addressed urgently. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. And it's important to talk about these things. I know it's very vulnerable to talk about finances and the things that we struggle with, but this is real life. These are our lives, other people's lives. And by keeping that quiet, it prolongs unnecessary suffering when we already face so many barriers.
Yes, exactly.
So now I'm going to ask you a question that will lighten up this thought-provoking interview. We have a Finding Avalon playlist that's kind of like a companion piece to the podcast. And I would love to add some of your suggestions to this playlist. What do you think?
Ooh, yes, this sounds fun. So, my current STEM song, the song I'm listening to on repeat to regulate my nervous system, is Armor by Iniko. And there's a line that says, I don't need armor, which just speaks to me because vulnerability is core to who I am. And another line in the song is, my body is a battlefield. And for me, as a person with invisible disability who is raising awareness online and constantly facing fake claiming and debates about my disability, this line also really speaks to me.
Hmm. And do you have another one?
I do. It's called Seed by Aurora.
I love
And
it.
definitely speaks to me as an instinctual autistic person who grew up in the wilderness. Um, the line, "You can't eat money or oil." No. We need the trees, we need nature. I personally, as a person who grew up in the wilderness, cannot feel okay without nature, so I feel deeply connected to that song.
I'm so glad you said that. This is one of the songs that I listen to on repeat. It is so powerful, and it's based on an indigenous proverb, isn't it? That when the rivers have dried up and the last trees have fallen and there's no more fish, only then will you realize that you can't eat money.
Yeah, I've heard that proverb. I'm starting to tear up right now.
I know, I know. It's it's about that inherent value of life, creatures, the environment, ourselves, and that we shouldn't be exploited for profit.
You know what? This is actually central to conversations about disability because the devaluing of disabled people is deeply intertwined with the overvaluing of money, right? We are considered not valuable if we cannot bring in income. And
Mhm.
this is an absurd way of looking at value. People have value, just like we need trees and nature, right?
Mhm. Capitalism tells some mighty big lies about if you're producing, you're valuable. Just like the inspiration point, if you're exceptional, you're valuable or palatable to non disabled people. If you can produce and you can prove your worth and contribute to this big machine, then yeah, you're valid. But that's not true. We are born with inherent value no matter what we do, whether we are advocates like we are or whether we are not doing that at all. We have that value. And capitalism and ableism lies to society and says no, they don't have any value. I fundamentally reject that.
So do I. And I think that when we talk about, like the things that non disabled people could learn from disabled people, and it's not that
Yes.
inspiration porn. This is one of those things. You can learn from disabled lives and disabled experiences that human beings have value. All of us, we all do. This is something we all need to be reminded of.
Completely. So, Layla, shall we move on to another question?
Absolutely. Let's go. What's next?
Okay, great. In 3 words, whether that's 3 individual words or a simple 3 word phrase, what does disability inclusion mean to you and why?
My first word is support. Because disabled people need support, and while our culture values independence, interdependence is actually how humans thrive. My second word is human, because disability is a human experience, and most people will experience disability at some point in their lives. And my third word is pride, because disabled people are not broken, non disabled people. We have our own equal identity.
I appreciate you so much.
I love this conversation.
So, Layla, as we wrap up, what is something that you're excited about lately?
I'm really excited because I am launching an online membership community that is going to be a place to belong for high masking autistic adults. It's called the Chameleon Collective. And if that is
Mm.
something that you'd like to learn more about and maybe be a part of, head over to highmasking.ju.mp. That's highmasking.jump, but with a dot in the middle, and you can sign up for the waitlist.
And it's called the Chameleon Collective.
The Chameleon Collective for high masking autistic adults.
I
Yes.
love it. We are chameleons in so many ways. Sometimes we are forced to be, sometimes we are because we're so multifaceted. I think it encompasses everything. I love it. I'm going to definitely be checking it out, and I will be also putting a link when I post this online as well. So thank you for that. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
No, that's it. I'm really, really happy with this conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for being part of the show. It's been fascinating to talk with you and to learn about your advocacy work, but also your unapologetic pursuit of disabled joy. It's something that I hope a lot of people will start thinking about, because often we are so caught up with the struggle. And yes, that is valid and very real and very ever present, but also thriving. You mentioned the word thriving and pursuing joy unapologetically. And that's a gift even for me to hear from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jenna. This has been an absolute pleasure. I love that we had the opportunity to dive into so many current, important topics.
Thanks so much for listening along to my Labor of Love podcast that celebrates and centers authentic disabled voices. Help me reach even more people by a few quick and easy acts of allyship. Please follow, share, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Special artist thanks and credit for the unreleased feature song Coal Miner, written by Steve Hoskins, arranged by Naomi Kafka, and performed by Naomi Kafka, Bryn Porter, and Tony Kostelik. Like always, I appreciate you joining in to Finding Avalon, and I'll see you next time.